I've watched this happen more than once. Someone's clearing out a barn or the back corner of a garage, finds a stack of old rusted oil cans nobody's touched in decades, and tosses the whole lot in the scrap pile without a second look. Most of them genuinely were just cans. But every so often, one wasn't. And before we're done here, I'll tell you about the exact detail that separates a $5 can from one that's sold for close to $1,000. A detail so small that most people who've owned that exact can their whole lives have never once noticed it. Start with the ordinary ones, because I owe you the honest baseline first. A plain, everyday quart can, printed with simple lettering and no real graphic design, generally sells for $5 to $30. That's the reality for most of what's sitting out there, and I won't pretend otherwise. But even here, shape tells you something worth knowing before we go any further. The earliest quart cans, made in the early 1900s before the tapered, rounded design became standard, were boxy and square-sided, almost like a small tin box rather than the familiar can shape most people picture. If you're holding one shape like that, you're already looking at something older than most of what survived, and that's before we've even gotten to the good part. Somewhere in the middle decades of the last century, manufacturers shifted again toward cardboard composite cans with a metal top and bottom instead of solid metal all the way through, a cheaper way to build the same product. Those composite cans genuinely don't survive well, since cardboard soaks up moisture and falls apart in a way solid metal never does, which means a clean, surviving composite can from that transitional era is its own small kind of rare, purely because so few made it this long in one piece. Here's where it gets interesting, because this next one runs completely backward from what you'd expect. The most famous brand names, the ones everyone recognizes immediately, Texaco, Mobil, Esso, Gulf, Shell, are often the least valuable simply because they were produced in such enormous volume, sold at thousands of stations across the entire country for decades, that survivors are genuinely everywhere. Obscure regional brands, the small companies that only sold gas in one state or one corner of the country before disappearing decades ago, are frequently worth more precisely because so few people ever made them and so few people bothered saving them. Check the name on the can against what you actually recognize. The one you've never heard of might be the one worth stopping on. Regional brands that only operated in a single state or a handful of counties before closing down or getting bought out decades ago left behind a genuinely small footprint, and collectors, specifically chasing the history of their own home region, will pay real attention to a name that never made it much further than a few towns over. And that's not even the strangest reversal I found, because the graphic itself works the exact same backward way, and it's worth reading closely rather than glancing at. Companies changed their logo design multiple times over the decades, and an early version of a logo, especially one that lines up with a specific landmark moment in the company's own history, tends to bring more than the later, more familiar design everyone remembers. Compare the exact artwork against reference photos online before assuming every can with the same brand name is worth the same amount, because two cans from the same company, printed only a few years apart, can carry noticeably different graphics and noticeably different prices. Companies sometimes rolled out a new logo to mark an anniversary, a merger, or a genuine milestone in the business, and those transitional designs, printed for only a short window before the company settled on something more permanent, tend to be exactly the versions collectors are actively hunting down. Now, here's a detail almost nobody thinks to check next, and it's worth a close look before you even get to the spout. Early cans were often printed using a genuine lithography process directly onto the metal, producing crisp, layered color that holds up under close inspection, while later, cheaper production runs sometimes used simpler single-color stamping that looks noticeably flatter by comparison. Run your eye across the artwork for that layered, printed depth before deciding a plain-looking can is simply plain. And once you've checked that, there's one more small mechanical detail that dates a can almost as precisely as anything else you'll check. Early cans typically used a simple triangular pour spout stamped right into the metal, while later cans moved to a separate screw-on or snap-on spout sold alongside the can. A can with that older integrated spout is generally pointing you toward an earlier production run, the same way a shape or a logo does, just from a different angle on the same object. Size changes the conversation next, and it's worth pulling apart the small quart cans from their much larger cousins. 1 and 5 gallon cans, the kind with a wire bail handle arching over the top for carrying, were built for garages and service stations rather than individual customers, which means far fewer were ever produced compared to the quart cans sold by the millions at every corner store. Size works backward here too, the same way it does with the rarer names and the earlier shapes. A large can in good condition, with its handle intact and the graphics still legible, tends to draw more attention from collectors, specifically because that handle is the first thing to bend, rust through, or snap off entirely over the decades, and a can that's kept its handle whole has already survived odds most people never think about. Decades of getting knocked around a workbench or dragged across a concrete floor without anyone treating it like something worth protecting. And now we're finally at the detail I told you about at the very start, the one that cost somebody real money simply by not knowing to check it. Whether the can has actually been opened decides more of the final number than almost anything else you'll check. A can that's still factory sealed, never opened, with the original contents still inside, is dramatically rarer than the exact same can sitting empty on a shelf, because the vast majority of these were bought specifically to be used, poured out, and thrown away. Collectors are split on what to do with a sealed one they find. Some empty it carefully to prevent the old oil from eventually damaging the can from the inside. Others insist on keeping it completely untouched, contents and all, because an unopened can is proof of exactly what it claims to be, in a way an emptied one never quite matches again. Either way, do not simply pour it out and rinse the can before you've actually looked at what you're holding. That choice is permanent. A sealed can also usually still carries its original cap or closure exactly as it left the factory, which is itself a small detail worth checking, since a mismatched or clearly replaced cap on an otherwise sealed-looking can is often a sign it's been tampered with somewhere along the way, even if the rest of the can looks completely untouched. Condition matters, but maybe not in the direction you'd assume, and this next part genuinely surprises people every time. Surface, rust, and a little wear don't necessarily kill the value the way people think they do, especially on an older can, where some honest age is expected and even preferred by serious collectors. What actually hurts a can is dents that distort the printed graphic, or rust that's eaten completely through the metal rather than just sitting on the surface. Look at whether the artwork is still readable before you decide a can is too far gone to matter. A can with an honest, even patina of surface rust across the whole thing often photographs and sells better than one that's been aggressively scrubbed or repainted, since collectors in this hobby specifically want to see age they can trust, not a shine that makes them wonder what got covered up underneath it. Put a genuinely rare regional can together with a real collection of quality pieces, an early shape, a scarce logo, a sealed original, an intact gallon can with its handle still whole, and complete collections built around exactly that kind of quality have sold for close to $1,000, real money for objects most people assume belong in a scrap pile. And I want to be honest with you about how far this whole hobby actually stretches, because it goes further than any single can ever will. These oil cans come from the exact same collecting world as vintage gas station signs, and one particular porcelain sign, found in a Michigan attic where it had sat completely untouched for decades, sold at auction for $1.5 million. Nobody's finding that exact sign, and I'm not telling you your can is worth anywhere near that. But it tells you the ceiling on this entire category of collecting is a lot higher than a rusty can in the corner of a barn would ever suggest. That sign had sat in the same attic for decades, completely unrecognized for what it actually was, which is exactly the same story every single item here has been quietly telling you the whole way through. Here's what ties every single one of these together, and it comes down to the same handful of things every time. The shape, since an early boxy can looks nothing like a later rounded one. The name, since the brand nobody recognizes sometimes beats the one everybody does. The exact graphic and logo version. The spout style, and whether it was ever actually opened. None of that requires an expert eye. It just requires actually looking at what's stacked against that garage wall instead of assuming rust means worthless. A can that's been sitting in the exact same spot for 40 years hasn't been getting less valuable the whole time. It's just been waiting for someone to actually turn it around and read it properly. My husband still has a shelf of these exact cans lined up in the garage, and every time I ask if he's ever checked whether any of them are actually old, he tells me he's been meaning to get around to it for about 11 years now. So before that stack gets scrapped or hauled off, take a real look first. Check the shape, read the name, compare the logo, and see if the spout is stamped into the can or added separately. Tell me down in the comments if you've got old oil cans sitting somewhere in your own garage or barn, and whether you've ever actually looked closely at one, because I have a feeling a few of you already know exactly where to check. And if you're not subscribed yet, hit that button and turn on notifications, because next time we're staying right here in the garage for something else entirely, and one of them has sold for more than most people's cars.